going to be an unusually interesting and wide-ranging discussion. Our chair this evening I will introduce, and then I'll leave it to him to introduce our two speakers. So Dr. Christopher Harding, who's sitting in the middle, I'm very proud to say is one of our former Daiwa scholars, who was on the Daiwa Scholarship Programme 2006-2007.
Around then.
Is that right? He's now a lecturer in Asian history at the University of Edinburgh, and his research focuses on the modern West's cultural dialogue with Japan and also with India. And he looks at religion, psychology and psychiatry and how those subjects have become intertwined recently. He's also one of the AHRC, that's the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and BBC's 10 New Generation Thinkers for this year, which means he's started appearing regularly on the radio. So he's going to be making regular contributions on the Radio 3 programme called Night Waves, and I think he's already started doing that from this month. So thank you very much, Chris. I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Well, very warm welcome. I won't speak for very long, so I'll just do it from here, if that's okay. Firstly, thank you very much all for coming along to hear about the weighty topic of the fate of religion in Japan and the UK. We have two speakers who I think together make rather a fruitful pair, I'm hoping. First of all, Ian Reader is Professor of Religious Studies at Lancaster University, one of the UK's foremost scholars of Japanese religion. We could push the boat out and say the foremost scholar of Japanese religion in the UK. He works on everything from Shinto to Buddhism, to religion on the internet, pilgrimage, also recently on the question of secularization in Japan. Then we have Reverend Soken Tsushimoto, who trained as a Zen monk in Kyoto in the Rinzai tradition, who rose to the top of the Rinzai hierarchy and has since become involved in what I think is possibly a growth area, if that's an appropriate term for religion now and in the immediate future, which is integrative medicine. Seeing religion with medicine, with grief care, terminal care, also counselling and psychotherapy. So we'll hear first from Professor Reed and then we'll hear from Reverend Tsushimoto after that. I'll let you go.
I'm supposed to go and stand there, aren't I? So,
okay.
well, I've got a timepiece because I'm supposed to speak for 20 minutes and I forgot to bring a watch with me, so I've stolen the Daiwa director's mobile phone and hope to make it out because it's much better than mine. Right, thank you very much. Although it does say in the outline about religion in the UK, Japan and the UK, I'm a specialist on Japan more than on and I will just make a very few comments at the end about religion in other parts of the world, including the UK, very, very generally, but I will focus mostly on Japan. And in a way, I'm drawing on a number of things I've published recently, including where I've talked about what I call a rising tide of secularization in Japan, where all the studies and surveys have shown a progressive decline in the numbers of people responding in surveys and engaging in practices that or saying that they belong to religious organisations or that they have any religious faith or belief, and generally also decline in religious practices as well. I'll say a little bit more later on. Most religious organisations are suffering in this context. The new religions of Japan, which has often been described as a kind of growing area, have been in serious trouble over recent years, and many of them have lost large numbers of followers, and some talk, at least behind the scenes, about being right on the brink in terms of decline and in trouble and so on. Sometimes they talk, some of the senior people in some of these groups talk to me off record, and so it's hard to say I name particular groups, but there is a general declining problem. The same is happening in Buddhism. Buddhist sects, organisations are facing difficulties. The head of a particular Buddhist sect, who said to me about 2 or 3 years ago, he said, in 10 years' time, 50% of the temples in Japan will have closed. Now, I thought at first he was overestimating, but the more I went around, particularly rural Japan, the more I looked at statistics, the more I looked at all sorts of other things, I wasn't sure that he was overestimating by that much, and there is a well-known survey done by a Nichiren Buddhist sect which showed that they predicted that 45% of their temples would disappear in the next generation. It's rural depopulation is eroding the tradition in the countryside. In cities, we're seeing that the main support structure of Buddhism, which in Buddhist temples in Japan, which has been the funeral business, or should we say the rituals for ancestors and so on, that is declining quite rapidly. In 2006, over a quarter of funerals in the Tokyo area alone were what they called mushukyo, non-religious. They had no religious elements whatsoever. The rise of secular funeral companies that have kind of started to eat into Buddhism's former monopoly of this area is growing all the time, and it's now starting to extend into kind of rural areas. I think a couple of years ago, when I was with a friend, a Buddhist priest in northern Hiroshima prefecture, rural area which you would normally consider to be a real Buddhist heartland, he said, in the last year or so, we've had these new funeral businesses starting to open up here, and they are starting to, people are going to them rather than to the temples for the rituals now. Looking in the same area, according to studies, and this is particularly true, is increasing in the younger generation. Over 50% of people in Japan say they do not believe in the existence of ancestors and spirits after death. Now, ancestors and the concept that spirits after death, continued after death in some form, was a mainstay of Buddhist practice in Japan. It's a mainstay of temples. As this is going on, as less and less people think that there is a spirit to memorialise after death, they are turning away from the Buddhist temples. And I think this is also particularly true of the younger generation. When I taught in Japan 25 years ago, the students I taught would be kind of slightly, they weren't necessarily hostile to the Buddhist tradition as such, but they were saying things like, well, I don't really believe in it, but when it comes to my turn, when my parents die, I will go through the Buddhist rituals that you're supposed to go through. The new generation appears not to be saying this anymore. They're saying, we don't need it, and that is going to pose serious problems. Now, there are numerous factors involved in this process. I mean, it would take hours to go through it, but as I say, urbanisation, education, changing attitudes of society, modernising, all of these things have been creative forces towards the secularising of societies in general, globally, particularly in what we call industrial and post-industrial, highly technologically developed societies, and that is certainly the case in Japan. There's another major influence that has really precipitated things in Japan, and that is the old Shinrikyo affair of 1995, when this particular registered religious group, and emphasised that it was a registered religious organisation, committed a series of atrocities culminating in the March 20th, 1995 sarin attack on the Tokyo subway. Ever since then, religion, which had a bad image, generally not a great image before, has looked worse and worse, and studies and surveys have repeatedly shown that one of the words that is most commonly articulated in the context of religion now is abunai, dangerous. Not just the new religions, but religions in general. I have Buddhist friends I know, the Buddhist priests who say they find it difficult to go out and proselytise because there is this image that has developed after all that religious groups can be dangerous, they can control your mind, you're giving up your autonomy if you get involved with religion. Now that is part, I think, of a modernising process in general, something that happens as people become more educated and so on. That those debates and those questioning of things, the old certainties of religion are spreading. You find them in Japan as in many other cultures. But I think with the Ulm affair, this has precipitated things very strongly. And we are seeing, for example, surveys where people are saying more and more, we want strict control over religious groups. Religious groups make it dangerous. In fact, there was a survey done of Japanese university students by Kokugaku in a university about 4 or 5 years ago, where one of the strongest articulated views was that proselytization by religious groups should be banned in public. So you're getting a kind of a very hostile approach to religion. It's not just, I could say a lot of things about Shinto too, the same sorts of problems and so on, but there is this notion that religion is somehow associated with scandal, with danger, with superstition. It's out of sync with modern society. It's out of sync with modern autonomous individuals who are, if you like, the focal point of contemporary society. It's not just institutional religion. A lot of ordinary sort of religious, kind of what we used to call customary religious practices, purchases, the use of amulets and so on and so forth, visits, going to festivals and so on, they tend to be in decline as well. The area that I know best, which is pilgrimage, I've done a lot of research on pilgrimage in Japan, it's often been regarded as a major area of religious practice in Japan. I've written about this in the past. In the 1980s, it was clear that there was a kind of great growth in pilgrimage travel in Japan. By the 2000s, this wasn't the case anymore. Apart from one pilgrimage, the Shikoku pilgrimage, which until very recently was growing in popularity, just about every other pilgrimage, particularly in regional pilgrimages in the inland sea on islands like Shodoshima, the numbers of pilgrims has been declining year on year on year. And we've seen the disappearance of a number of particularly regional pilgrimage sites. In fact, I think, again, this is part of the kind of secularizing trend. We see a priest that I was talking to in Kyushu who runs a major pilgrimage site, temple and pilgrimage route, said to me, in the old days, we used to compete, pilgrimage sites used to compete with each other to attract people to come to them. He said, in the old days, we used to compete with other pilgrimage sites. Nowadays, we're competing with Hawaii, Guam, and tourist destinations because people are more interested in going abroad, going outside. The notion, of course, one of the roots of pilgrimage in Japan, as in Europe, was in pre-modern times. It was the way you got away from your village, your native area. Probably the only way you could travel. It was the way to let off steam, so it was a form of tourism as well as a religious practice. Nowadays, you don't need to have the justification of religion or pilgrimage to go travelling. You can just go off on holiday and so on. And pilgrimage routes are finding it harder and harder to attract followers.